dodging questions like bullets as far as his alleged affair is concerned. President Hollande, totally indignant, he says, about the publication of an alleged affair in Closer magazine. He also went on to say there was no status for the role of First Lady, but you may remember we were discussing it earlier, and the state does provide the role of First Lady with 5 staff, which costs the state £17,000 per month. Let's talk about it in more detail. Kevin Craig, who advises on political crisis management, and French journalist Nabila Ramdani. Thank you both for joining us here on Sky News this afternoon. Nabila, to you first of all, how do you think he handled the last hour?
Well, the French president clearly said beforehand that he was not going to devote this major press conference on the economy to his love life, and that's exactly what he did. He said instead that he will address the matter later, and that he will clarify the status of the First Lady in his capacity as a private citizen and not as a head of state, which is, of course, farcical, because the status of the First Lady is crucial for his own role as a head of state. And, of course, there is a justifiable link between his private life and indeed his public life. And let's make no mistake, this is not a story about the right to privacy or indeed the right to secrecy. It's a major public scandal about the status of the First Lady. At the moment, we have a First Lady who is in hospital and who is breaching her own privacy by keeping journalists from Le Parisien newspaper informed about her health, and another woman, a potential other First Lady, a high-profile French actress who last week only was promoting her latest film, who is now in hiding. So this idea that the French shouldn't know what on earth is going on would mean that the very word democracy becomes meaningless.
Kevin, would you have got away with it from journalists here?
No way. The longer this speech went on this afternoon, the worse it's got for François Hollande. I've had the misfortune of listening to the whole thing in French, and for the first 45 minutes it was very turgid economic stuff, him giving his key messages about the pacte de responsabilité, la bataille contre le chômage, the battle against unemployment. That was what his aim was to get across. He's obviously decided on a holding strategy today, which is that when the first question on this affair finally came, I have to admit at that point I was quite excited, and the journalist just about forced it out, prefaced by a couple of gratuitous compliments. And then Hollande came in with this holding mechanism, which is not going to kill this story. And in Britain, can you imagine at a prime ministerial press conference, our press pack, with all due respect to them, would have been much more direct, and somebody would have said, that's fine, Monsieur le Président, but at the end of the day, we're paying for the First Lady, we pay for her staff, where she lives, her transport. Is she the First Lady or isn't she? End of. And he's been allowed so far to deflect the questions with the holding mechanism to try and get him through to before the visit to the States.
He was almost, Nabila, disrespectful of not necessarily just the role of First Lady, but also the present First Lady herself, saying he hasn't quite decided yet which one he's going to be, or who he's going to be taking to America when he meets with the President Obama and his wife next month. Almost like a dating show.
Well, absolutely, and François Hollande is famous for being indecisive, but he clearly will have to make up his mind, and I think he would have been courteous to probably told journalists whether he's visited her in hospital or not, for example. But I think Kevin is quite right to draw the attention to the fact that, you know, this whole issue about the First Lady really boils down to the fact that she's costing a small fortune to the taxpayers, and as you quite rightly said yourself, Kay, she's costing £17,000 a month to taxpayers, and taxpayers-funded perks also include homes across France, private jets, limousines, her own bodyguards, and this is a very lucrative and indeed high-profile job. And others, you know, of course, would argue, and indeed the vast majority of French would argue, that it's also about his credibility and his ability to conduct his job while he has other matters on his mind. And it's fair, it's fine to discuss the economy, especially given the circumstances in France. France, you know, is going through a very turbulent period economically. Unemployment is well past the 3 million mark. The cost of living is spiraling, and indeed taxes are extremely high. And let's not forget that France had 2 credit downgrades within the last year only. But having said that, he still has, the First Lady plays a very important role in supporting him in his work. And he needs somebody by his side, and indeed, not least of all, to travel abroad and indeed meet foreign dignitaries, including the Obamas.
Kevin, he has said that as far as public opinion is concerned, he is doing his best. What more does he need to do?
Well, he would say that it's the old honest Joe approach, and he became increasingly sort of French as he went on with the gestures, and he became more uncomfortable. What he needs, a good example of this, albeit quite extreme, was we might remember back, there was a former Labour cabinet member called Robin Cook, and if you remember, the media exposed back in the day that he was having a relationship outside his marriage, and brutal decision making was taken. You'll remember mentioning this in the memoirs of Alistair Campbell, so that the story could be closed down and moved on. The French president today has failed to say anything that will stop the massive volume of print, broadcast and online speculation, and I suspect he still has some quite difficult decisions to make, as was just said. There's more to this than meets the eye, because he's come out with a holding mechanism and it will do nothing to move the story on, albeit we see that his opinion rating has gone up 2 points, perhaps for being more interesting than the French thought he was before. Yeah, gone up 2 points so far, Nabila, but when the French people have heard what he's had to say today, and however way you cook it, he was disrespectful about the First Lady. Will that change the view of French women?
Well, in fact, it has to be said that Valérie Trierweiler is extremely unpopular amongst the French people, not least of all because of her attitude towards François Hollande's ex-partner, Ségolène Royal, and when she became the de facto First Lady, she supported a rival candidate to Ségolène Royal, and that has, stayed with the French. And 89% of the French, in fact, would like to see the president separate from Valérie Trierweiler. So she's not, very much liked by the French. Nonetheless, whatever your views about the First Lady, she remains First Lady, and her role is extremely important. She represents the country domestically, but also internationally. She heads charities and other organizations. And this idea that you can just brush this matter under the carpet and not, be transparent about, who is the First Lady of France is just a bit ludicrous, really. Okay, Nabila and Kevin, we're out of time, but great to talk to you. Thank you so much for joining us here on Sky News this afternoon. Jeremy Thompson is next.